Welcome to Creative and Tech, a podcast show powered by ReadSpeaker AI. I'm your host, Carrie Roberts, and I'm the brand evangelist for North America at ReadSpeaker. And this show is all about highlighting the various brands, organizations, and people that are creatively using one of the fastest growing spaces in technology, artificial intelligence, especially in areas of conversational AI, voice technology, and more. Today, we are talking about AI in customer service. And I have with me someone who has been in this industry for a long time, Mr. Martin Hill-Wilson of Brainfood Consulting. Welcome, Martin. Excited to have you here.
Thank you very much, Kerry. That's a very generous introduction, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Yes, so I want to start with you first because I was reading your bio. You have a master's in theology, which I thought was interesting way back when. And then you went on to be the CEO of one of the first BPOs and CX consultancies in the UK. Mm-hmm. And you are a renowned speaker talking a lot on AI and the contact center customer service. Can you tell us a little bit more just about how you got into this space? What excites you about it?
Yeah, well, it's some interesting data points you gave across that thing there. So theology, if it's anything, is an interesting insight into how people are.
Yes.
Just take that as a beginning point. So it's curiously served me very well. And that is a core interest I have. You know, it's why we're alive and human to human and all the rest of the stuff. And I've never really lost that ambition. So I've always looked for a job where I can do that stuff. And I've kind of ended up in two camps, really. One is the pure people side. So I trained initially as an experiential trainer, which back in the day was terribly. You probably now put, hopeless CEOs through that as the last ditch attempt to humanize them. But that's really grown to be slightly less flippant about that. And emotional intelligence, big deal. Everybody's into that. I think probably related to the conversation we're going to have. Empathy has turned up this year as, I think, a symbolization of the need to connect deeper and really hear the other person's experience. So that's kind of always been on one side of the thing. And then we got, as I said, into, strangely enough, having done all this experiential training, into call centers, because at the time we had fantastic communication skills that we've developed, and all you needed was a Bakelite phone and some yellow pages. Hey, presto, you're in call centers. It's a little bit more expensive, the investment these days, but that was it back in 1981. And we did it, and we thought it was revolutionary, because you've got to remember, talking to folk coming into their careers now, they don't get call centers. And you have to sort of recontextualize it around of probably actual conversational AI or messaging or another form of interface, and go, can you imagine a time where actually the only way of doing business was face-to-face? You didn't do it any other particular way. And suddenly you had this amazing opportunity to talk to people remotely, anywhere on the planet, and you could actually connect to them and sell them stuff. We used to sell them airlines. I told somebody a couple of days ago, I suddenly remember we did a test way early in the morning selling contraceptives to farmers for their cows. I mean, it's completely crazy. Open book it was in terms of what we experimented with. And nobody quite knew what we were up to, but they did know that there was something extraordinary on the energy. And actually, one of the reasons I think that certainly we contributed to was the development of call centers as separate cultural centers to the incumbent legacy business. And I think that was the very first blush of pure-blooded CX, if you want. It was people-focused, it was listening-focused, it was engagement-focused. And actually, from my own perspective of where the industry's gone to over 40 years of 4 economic cycles, take the cost out, send it offshore and all the rest of it, we've really destroyed the heart and essence of the thing, which is it's a human-to-human connection. Or I should say it's connecting to the human at the right level. You can do that through conversational AI. It's a much more interesting challenge, by the way, which is one of the reasons I'm into that. But the industry has developed and matured. I've run bits and pieces. I got 10 years into systems integration, hence my interest in the tech. I got out of that, and then I've done stuff on social customer service, because I always think it's interesting to have your problems aired in public. It raises the standards and the tension. So I thought that was a nice dynamic to get us to be better respected. I've done stuff more recently on emotive CX for customer interaction, which I know we'll talk about in a while. And I've done a thing on, within the contact center world, we're very heavy into quality assurance. And so often that was to do with regulatory decision making, which I thought was fine, but not the real point. What about the customer's voice? So again, flipping that round to being a much more learning centric rather than a tick box survival process. So over that period of time, I've sort of invented lots of programs, which I kind of like to do. I've run my own business called Brainfood Consulting. I'm probably too recalcitrant now to actually work at a proper organization. I'm too I'm too selfish just doing my own thing and enjoying it. And I have always considered it to be a great honor to earn my living just by communicating, because I think, that's an art in itself. And so talking or writing, and I found actually when I was doing the systems integration, there was a curious gap between what the vendors sold and what the customers understood. And I fill that gap with thought leadership. And indeed, right now, the joke really is you lost me at omnichannel. And by the way, there's over 35, including Zoom 36, people, at least in the marketplace, if not more these days. But nobody really understands what they're buying. And so nobody bothers to contextualize it, talk about the use cases and bring it to life. And I just find those are stories I enjoy telling. I find that customer service is an interesting window into the soul of an organization, because if you don't care about the customers through that, you just don't care about them. And the rest of CX is just window dressing and branding. But if you do a good job through that lens, then the brand is true through and through. So I found myself curiously stuck in customer service in a way I would have never put my hand up at 18 and gone, I'd love to be in the call center.
Well, I love that you're talking about, it's about human. It's about that human interaction. Sometimes we forget about it. It's like, well, how do we just kind of fix it with technology? But it's more than that. Are you seeing, like you said, you've been in this space for so long. Are you seeing contact centers, customer service in general across verticals be more open to using AI, or are they not? Are there certain verticals that like it and use it more? What have you been seeing?
So in terms of just talking about it, I was doing sort of one-day masterclasses on it 4, 5, 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And knowing the people in our industry, it's a relatively small community in the UK. I knew that the people who turned up to those events were definitely the thought leaders, the very early adopters. And even some vendors, turning up. So that was kind of like the very, very early genesis point. If I zoom through, and I'll give you my very best example right now, I think there's a retail brand here in the UK. It's one of those transformational stories that used to be catalog based and went entirely digital. Lots of different names, but have now wrapped themselves up into a single brand called the Very Group. Very, very well run, very, very progressive in everything. And last month, they announced that their bot, which is actually running as it happens on IBM Watson, is now the largest channel that they run in an omni-channel context. So how about that?
Well, how long did it take to get to that point? Do you know?
Now that's a smart question. That's a really smart question. So if you listen to Mark Billingham talk, number one, he will tell you that you don't get excited about tech until you've done your foundation work, right? So he started off by understanding. Well, he started off, but actually, there's a very good little. If you're a consultant, you always make money out of boxes with two lines in them. Create 4 squares and sell it, right? So there's a particularly interesting version of that, which is when you compare effort to value.
Yeah.
And if you look at it in those terms, there's a box which is absolutely useless to both brand and also to customer, where you should just eliminate it. It's a redundant thing. Yeah. And that's how, in today's language, that would be service design, is get rid of it. Continuous improvement, get rid of it. Top end, there's a really valuable thing going down where human to human absolutely work. Roughly speaking, my motto is when it's emotive, when it's complex, when it matters to the relationship, you use human to human. You might do some triage to begin with through some form of conversational AI, but you end up with the human to human bit. And that's only grown, by the way, during the pandemic, with vulnerability, with also anxiety, with need for reassurance. Even the very best form of conversational AI lacks a certain authenticity, because I could get just the same answer from you as a human, but today I might just want that bit more reassurance. So funnily enough, the live assistance, rather than die, has sustained itself, and I suspect will do going forward for the foreseeable future. Whereas the conventional wisdom was, as digital grew, voice would decline and then get rebirthed, by the way, as digital voice, but that's another part of the conversation. But in terms of live voice, it's still holding strong. And then you've got the other two bits, which is you either decide to get into automation, which is the whole RPA movement, just don't bother with it, but just get on with it. And then if it matters particularly to the brand, you bother to animate self-service through conversational AI. And if you do your analysis like that, you've got your 4 buckets and you work that stuff through. But in all those instances, you put a very, very strong lens on simplification, reducing cognitive effort. Because even if it's got humans in there, we waste an awful lot of time apologizing for the system is slow today, which is a euphemism saying it's screwed at our end, by the way. We ain't done the work we should have done. It's difficult on my desktop. I've got multiple screens. The process doesn't work, whatever, whatever. And you will never, ever, ever, however good your technology is in terms of conversational AI, automate rubbish. It's the oldest rule in the book, really. So you've got to simplify it to make it work anyway, and then you can hand it over to something that can certainly learn to some degree, but is still nonetheless a construct within which you have to guess how another human being is actually going to behave, right? And that's a very, very tough thing to do at the end of the day. So if you do those things well, then you're going to succeed. And the bit that you do before any of that is then understand customer intent. So Mark said he thought he had a couple of thousand. He ended up with 10,000 different intents, interestingly. He logged every single one of them and worked out what the resolution was to that. Interestingly, if you then talk about intent from the point of view of building language models, you'll often find that the particular intent is then got like a honeycomb around it of utterances. So I can't remember which American brand it was, but when I read it, I went, wow. The lady who was doing conversational AI said, we have a very simple key intent, which is, what's my balance today? Pretty simple. And she said, I was amazed when we finally toted it all up. We ended up with 2,200 variations of how customers ask that single one intent. So you take that dynamic with the 10,000, and that's what you've got to do to understand what's going down before you start to say, I'm prepared to hand that over to an automated way of engagement. And so he did all of that. He got it all sorted out. He's then got a very powerful cross-functional agile team where you've got subject matter experts, you've got compliance, you've got the vendors in there, you've got the design teams, you've got the digital teams, all working on a never-ending cycle of improvement. And so that bot has gone through goodness knows how many sprints to the point where it's deeply integrated with back-end systems, so that if I go, so where is the package and when am I going to get it? I don't have to phone you. All the normal things I'm going to ask you. It's a complete end-to-end journey. Hence, you know, they really have liberated, by the way, voice and chat to only concentrate on those most difficult points, because they bothered to sit in the customer's shoes, figure out if they are going to use a bot, how it works. And interestingly, on the scoring, it's 4 out of 5. So clearly, it's one that actually serves the needs of those customers.
And which one is that? Do you remember which one it is?
Yeah, it's the Very Group.
Okay.
Yeah, and they built that on IBM Watson. But the story I've just told you is many of the lessons, I suppose, that it takes to get that stuff going. Now, I'll compare that with another thing that's going on in our space right now, which is a growing realization that actually COVID is still being used as an excuse for poor customer service, particularly with some of the larger brands. And it's got to the point where it's on the BBC, it's in some of the major industry reports. We've had a lot of soapboxing going on our side of LinkedIn, with a lot of people turning up with a lot of flag waving, going, yeah. And I'm going, well, by the way, you are meant to be CX gurus here, but let's forget that for a second. But you're on your consumer activism thing. And everybody's getting super, super upset. And interestingly, we've zoned in on bots because quite obviously, voice channel got flooded during COVID and pandemic, as all forms of life did. You know, we've seen a massive move over to social, a massive move over to messaging. I think the Lloyds Bank group, I was sitting in a session where one of the frontline teams said we went from 40 a week up to 7,000 in just 1 week. You know, a complete transition in terms of usage. Customers are up for it. They're open. They're trying new ways of engaging. They will do bots. Some of those bots were spun up extremely quickly. And I think you said it earlier on, the trouble we've got here is the fact that it doesn't lend itself to a single integrated experience that delivers me the outcome. It's often done in a siloed kind of a way. It's more frustrating. I often end up, as I used to have to do anyway, sitting in a damn queue, talking to a human being. And that's very, very frustrating. And some of the other conversations I'm having at the moment, listening to people who built stuff very quickly during the pandemic, because needs must, you know, that was a tough time to get stuff done. I think I heard lots in the States, by the way, of people applying, I don't know what it was in your context, but it were a lot of federal authorities had to provide bot type services for applying for money or loans or all those kinds of stuff. And they had to spin them up in 7 days, you know, whatever it was, really, really fast. They were remarkable given what they did, but now there's a need for much deeper back-end integration, refinement of the conversational flow, all of those kinds of bits and pieces. And when they weren't done well, and many of our self-service routines were not, we've now got this current conversation going, which is that actually, and there's a mixture between possibly trying to reclaw some profit and not re-employing, because people are 70% still of contact center cost, and furlough and not quite turning up has been a bit of an excuse. We don't quite know what the truth is, but there's definitely a customer perception as we speak that things are not back to normal and they need to be now.
So, you talk so much about, again, empathy and emotions, and you just talked about how, there can be one question, but there's thousands of intents that are similar. So in order for any type of conversational AI, whether it's a chatbot or a voice bot or voice tech, to work, we've got to start there. So how would somebody start? Is it about interviewing their people? Is it about asking the people in customer service what they hear the most? How do you suggest you really start with the human piece in the beginning and then use the tech?
Well, I think in all forms of trying to build something, if you don't co-create it, you're missing a huge opportunity. I mean, that just stands for everything. So in this particular case, who are our stakeholder groups? Without a shadow of a doubt, the customer, and by the way, I think that we live in a world right now where there is less generational difference than before. People of my generation had to get the plastic out to buy stuff rather than go to the shops. A whole bunch of stuff happened. And some of that behavior has remained sticky, even whilst the shops have reopened again. So funnily enough, we're much more up for it than we ever were before. And actually in conversational AI, voice has always remained a favorite for over 65s anyway. So curiously, adoption of smart speakers in the older generations has been very, very strong. Equally, funnily enough, some of the younger lot have actually been, God forbid, talking to people live over voice, blowing everyone's preconceived ideas on that point. So talk to customers, probably talk to them in terms of as many segments as you can afford to do. Incidentally, one of the bits of work I do at the moment is on diversity inclusion, and I'm making the point to the CX community that is an excellent lens through which to understand needs. It's another way in which you get underneath the skin of your customers. And if you're not addressing that, you should be. And I'm also saying to the D&I crew, by the way, go and talk to these people. They've got a fantastic toolkit for understanding needs and helping meet those needs. So I think that you try to understand all the differences that the customers have got. Talking to advisors gives you a secondary insight into that. And indeed, if you do your classic research where you do a bit of qualitative, deep dive, ethnographic type stuff, and then you scale it through quantitative, you could possibly do that initially through the advisor community, just to generally understand what they're hearing about the customers, do a little bit of maybe direct interviewing with customers, and then scale that across your customer base in a representative sample to find out the degree to which those insights hold true right the way across. So in other words, really do understand what customers are trying to achieve with you, their propensity potentially to using something different, and what their needs are. And you will find within all of that, within a hierarchy of prioritized things, that's how you start to generate, as you well know, your use cases. And because you're doing change management, you're trying new stuff, don't do the most difficult stuff with the highest risk associated. That's just plain silly. Start with the most simple of things. And we are certainly, I think, as customers, quite up for that. Interestingly, I think some people's exposure to this is happening more and more as IVR, traditional push button IVR, has been replaced with digital voice. And we're discovering, rather than having to conform to a predefined framework, we can actually operate within the one that says, just tell me what you want, and I will take on the responsibility of understanding that. So a lot more triage is done through that. And in that sense, it doesn't really matter whether you then have an interface that you recognize as a bot, as opposed to just this voice that turns up somewhere at the beginning of a conversation. The fact of the matter is that kind of conversational AI continues to be persistent increasingly throughout a journey. So, the fact that I can understand in real time, which I think is a highly significant trend, by the way, that has taken place in the recent past, means that we can now understand what the customer wants very early on, triage effectively. Google, as just a case point with their CCAI, makes that all-important decision now about whether or not it appears that my need can be self-served as opposed to live, and that's a very, very important decision point, which we couldn't really achieve very satisfactorily through IVR before, but we can do now. And listen to that conversation throughout. And then looking at it from the advisor point of view, the same thing happens for me, which is this conversational AI is still sitting in, listening to the conversation, deciphering its intent. And I'm then served as an advisor with relevant workflow and knowledge articles being pushed to my desktop because we've understood that in real time. And then right at the end of the call, of course, what you've got is a recording with a lot of it already tagged with sentiment and with intent, ripe then for post-call analytics. Or if you want to bring it into real-time analytics, where now there's prompts actually on the screen, on that side of the screen, advising me that maybe we've missed a point, or you need to be a bit more empathetic, or whatever the point is. So, conversational AI, outside of the preconception of it has to look like a bot in a sort of little widget, is actually threaded through the conversation increasingly in both live and also in all forms of self-service.
Well, I like too that you're, talking about the value of qualitative data. It's something I am very strong in, and especially in conversational AI, it matters a lot. And I like how you said, in the very beginning, getting the qualitative data and then scaling it quantitatively. So are you suggesting that, okay, we're going to ask questions to real people and then say, okay, we're seeing these commonalities, and now let's maybe send out a survey? Would that be kind of an example, or can you maybe share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. I think go back one, and what's your chosen comfort zone in delivery? How much are you agile? How much are you waterfall? So as you probably move from increasingly sort of waterfallish to agile-ish, you can afford to kickstart earlier in the process. So I don't suggest you go in entirely ninja agile and just literally catch the first ball and then try and stay up all night and make it better by tomorrow morning. That's a bit too kamikaze. Do some research, as we've talked about. And it may be, by the way, that you can say, actually, we can capture text quite happily because we've been running chat for 6 years. So in fact, we've got a ton of intents already sitting resident for me, and I can just put it through my machine and process that at scale, fine tune it. And indeed, in today's world, you and I can list off at least a dozen vendors who aren't just very good at this now, but will also have vertical market language models already done and dusted. So you're starting fairly far down the line these days in terms of something, but that doesn't still excuse the point that we're making here, which is understand the customers, go listen to them, really understand what they're trying to do there, make sure you're completely clear. And once you've kind of kick-started that, remember the greatest blessing that conversational AI offers you is then a real-time letterbox of customers posting you what they want. In that sense, it's as good as conversational analytics, because it keeps giving you every day a customer interacts. You don't understand just intent, you also understand the phraseology of it. You understand how they're going to communicate. And if you ever spend any time on a Google search page and wonder at the stupidity of the human race and wonder at the smartness of Google, you will realize that we as humans just aren't articulate in any degree what we put into that search box. We just put mumbo jumbo rubbish and expect Google to understand it. And if you look at the very bottom of the page, you'll see all the different other ways that people have said the same thing that they think you have said. And quite frankly, it's an absolute miracle that it comes back with any relevance whatsoever. And in that sense, that's one of the big problems that we've got with customers, which is that we're not logical. We don't speak in the same way. We don't use language in the same way. Our reservoir of it's an interesting thing to actually do this piece of research. What's your base vocabulary? And there are different numbers for different people. There's a person I'm very keen on the. And she makes a really great set of points around of emotional granularity. And she talks a little bit about how emotions are brought into focus by being able to articulate them in terms of words and language, like Schadenfreude, we all know that. And she goes on to list another half dozen ones, ones unique to different cultures. And once you hear the description underneath the word, you might never have seen it. You go, oh, exactly. That's exactly how, I feel about that. The Dutch have got one, which is the experience of just sitting at home with a glass of wine, with somebody you loved, completely chilled out, very safe. And it's just that word. It's just that word. And we all got that experience, but whatever it is. The Japanese, have got another one, which is really fantastic, which is the embarrassment of having somebody, without asking them, do something for you which you didn't want and didn't like, but you still need to look like you're grateful afterwards for. And that's just so Japanese, but we can all still relate to that. There's a particular word that describes that emotion. And the more we use language to bring that into being, then the more precise we can be. And it's exactly the same thing when we're looking at the challenge of conversational AI. I mean, we talk still a lot about context, and yes, absolutely, we need to know the context. Otherwise, we mix one word meaning with another meaning, still with the same word, blah, blah, blah. But there's still precision of language. And the problem we have here, as I've said before, is we have different volumes of vocabulary to use as individuals. And sometimes we're just very sloppy with how, and we can't disambiguate how we feel. We just feel rubbish. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, the stuff I do on Emotive CX is to say, we own the problem because we're in service to you, the customer. So we are now taught how to get you to talk a little bit more about your backstory, start to recognize, how you're coming over, not just functional needs, but emotive needs as well. And we start to connect and we start to corroborate and things like that. And of course, the more that you can hit people at the level of their functional needs and their emotive needs, the richer is your understanding of that other human being, the more likely it is you're going to get a first-time outcome, and more likely the person's going to feel great about that as well, at the end of the day. And to my mind, the interesting point about conversational AI is that is an incredible follow-up act. We're starting with simple, but there's no reason there's a ceiling to this. As we develop our conversational AI capabilities, there is no reason that if we go 40, 50 years into the future, I have a persistent conversational AI buddy who I've had probably since my very first year at kindergarten or school, and continues to be my reservoir of knowing me and know what I want. And increasingly, I always did use it to interface with the teacher bot, with the employer bot, with the shopping bot, with the police bot, university bot, whatever. My life has been lived as a result of that at the end of the day. And in that context, by the way, when it's ubiquitous and we all have that, and we sorted out all the problem with data privacy and you will then find an equal number of bots for every single thing going on out there, and the understanding will be continuously refreshed. Even I would suggest to the level that Martin Hill Wilson's doppelganger bot has got a particular nuance in terms of how he talks, which is probably modeled on me. So again, your particular organizational bot probably exists as a master bot, but then will have as many personalized versions of itself as there are customers, or in CX as you can afford based on the customer value. That's 40,
yes,
50
and
years out
I want, because it's interesting, a lot of what you're saying here. And again, I love that you're talking about, even though it's tech, we got to go a little bit more human first. What we do here at ReadSpeaker, we are text to speech. So we are the voice that speaks back. And a lot of the voice that speaks back, it can be customized, it can have emotions. And I always talk to people about when you talk to a person on the phone, or as we're talking now, you have a certain reaction to that sound that you hear. Where do you see the value of something like a customized voice being within the customer contact center? Because you did just mention, it could be where there's one bot and then it kind of has multiple ones depending on who it talks to. Do you have any other thoughts regarding that?
Yes, I think, again, I can remember when I was still doing the master classes, I think the latest thing was script writers leaving Hollywood to come and write for bots. And that was a thing, and I thought that was dead interesting. And I know Wally Brill, who does that over at Google, he was, right early on in the day. And interesting, started out in IVR, but he was very quick and agile and got himself onto that. And he's been talking for a long time now about personas and understanding that and all the rest of it. I think some of the some of the Hollywood crew have turned up and are starting to trademark their voices, aren't they? And they're selling their voices, for all the rest of it. And some of the voice artists slightly beneath them are beginning to wake up to that. So the game is afoot, if you want, as far as that's concerned. And it would make perfectly good sense to consider the voice of that interface to be aligned with brand and to be aligned with task, probably in that order. So I do think there is a personality that a brand has if it's still sufficiently dynamic and young, and I think that gets conveyed in the way that it speaks and the nuances and the personality of the voice. And actually, I brought you something out because I knew we were going to have a few conversations on this. I also think, coming back to my D&I, we need to have some diversity in there. So a couple of years ago now, I found this thing called Q. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's the first genderless voice, from genderlessvoice.com, if anyone wants to see it. And that was actually done, let's look what it said. Voice of Q is developed by a team of researchers, sound designers and linguists in conjunction with the organisers of Copenhagen Pride Week. And it's part of an initiative called Equal AI and Others. And it's really fascinating. I used to play it when I did AI, presentations back in the day when it was face-to-face and all that sort of stuff. And it's very interesting, the voice. It really isn't either male or female. And when you listen to the sound engineering and you look at the pattern of a female voice and the pattern of a male voice, they tweaked it so it's neither one nor t'other. And again, a real sensitivity, because we do respond to others like us. That's a very powerful human signal. It's a subliminal thing that tells us we're likely to be understood, which is a core driver for all of us. And the other driver is, if that person's like us, maybe let's hope they're going to be friendly to us as well at the end of the day. So I think that finding personality and branding within voices, if done well, is superb. The caveat I'll put in is, if you ain't got the basics right, sounding swish ain't going to cut it. So I would say, don't waste your money on that if you really can't get your core service delivery organized and the bot is very early on in its development. Branding can get out of control, and where branding people can have literally branding police, and they will say, you are one iota off the brand palette, thou shalt go to hell forever and a day. You never hear customers going, oh, that orange just hurt me because it wasn't on brand. It doesn't work like that. So I think the voice thing, you can start with just well delivered engagement. That's the first thing to do. Can I get you and a customer to have a conversation without the customer going, doesn't work, where's the live assistance, and stay on track, get to an outcome and be happy with it. And if you've done that functionally, you've gone a long way as far as the first milestone is concerned. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, well, like you said, it has to work. People have to have a good experience. We have seen, obviously, whether it's a chatbot or a voice bot, when it first came out, people didn't love it. And then people had to kind of improve it, get them to try it again, because it is a process. You gave the use case of the very company. Are there any other use cases, either of companies you've worked with or companies you've seen, that you think do conversational AI very well, either from a chatbot or a voice standpoint?
Yes, I mean, I at the risk of irritating a lot of UK people, I don't think we're terribly well advanced here, and it might just be a product of how I educated myself. But I can reel off loads and loads and loads, really, from sort of the banks onwards in the States, particularly, and as we said, the Far East. So pretty much any financial services brand, big one, is going to have probably a chat bot, which works well. Utility companies do it very well in certain places. The US recruitment, if you ever want to join the army, by the way, in America, they've got an extremely powerful one. Your railway company out there, whatever it's called, can't remember, but that's got an extremely powerful one integrated into the page. That's been going for years and years and years. That all works very well. Some of the banks have been multimodal. So again, they've experimented with the difference between voice and text, and being able to blend that all in together. and that's gone extremely well at the end of the day. And as I said, if you go to the Far East, well, it's all over the place, and India, I have to say as well. Pretty much loads of insurance companies. Actually, I'll give you a good one more locally to Europe, which I was going to bring out today. A German company, which is an insurance company. I can't pronounce it because I'm just not going to make a mess of that. But I can tell you the owner is Stefan Knoll. He started by Knoll, and he started off by rebuilding a cloud-first brand. So that was the first point that he made. I'm not going to try and do this with legacy stuff, but having done that, he then literally has just got Alexa as his interface. And that therefore implies that he gets ID and V done. And I can not only get updates, but I can buy any form of insurance, and I can renew it, and I can swap it, and I can add more people in. And this was 4 years ago. He was starting with foreign travel health, liability insurance, adding health and property insurance. That was 4 years ago, right? You know, so really significantly powerful.
Well, I mean, you've listed so many, and I think, like you said, it's about people having taken that time and their due diligence in the beginning and testing and going back and forth, and it's not something they do at once and it works right away. They continue to kind of work on it. Is there maybe for anyone, and really in any vertical, that obvious they have a customer service or contact center of some sort,
yes,
and they are thinking of, okay, we want to add conversational AI, whether it's chatbot or voice or both, or we have one, we want to improve it. Is there maybe one piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah. I mean, I think the one that we covered earlier on is always worth restating, which is to keep listening. I don't think these projects are one and done. I think that's one of the most important and interesting points, by the way. If you have the habit of tackling a new technology with your A team who come in and make it work, you'll probably be moving them off to a new A team project. However, what you're left with is very much a live environment which never dies. Actually, it does die unless you continue to improve it. I think that's the better way of talking about it. Customer expectations change. One of the great problems, I would say, with conversational AI is what's its scope and how do we communicate that to customer? You know, because you may well have something called a claim, which is fine. I'm an insurance company. However, very few customers simply come and turn up at your front door with one single requirement. It's that and by the way, and it's the by the way that does you in. So at the very least, seamless escalation with context up to live, but also listen to by the way and go, often when people ask for red, they also ask for red and blue. Why aren't we making the conversational AI capable of doing blue as well? So you continue to iterate until you've got your rainbows, and it gets bigger and bigger. So if you then go and talk to somebody like Mercedes, for example, and you look at their conversational AI strategy, you really are looking at something awesome in terms of knowledge sources and the rest of it. And they actually have a very clever system where they have a master bot, but then a set of, highly detailed ones as far as topic is concerned, but the movement across them is seamless. And in fact, you just reminded me, because I had another example I brought for you today, which is which I was talking about. There's a good thing for listeners. I don't know where you are in the world, but over here, I'm very, very impressed with the work that's been done in the Conversational Design Institute, which is something that a guy called Hans van Dam has put up.
Yes.
I knew Hans when I was doing my stuff over there. He's built it very quickly. And I don't know if you participated in his recent festival, but I did a session early in the day and I stuck around for most of his day. He did a whole day. He was absolutely dead by 12, but he did an extraordinary job emceeing it. What was interesting to me was this. There were 600 people online pretty much persistently, and even about 35 to 45, I think, right at 5 minutes to midnight. And that to me is a very key signal, because the type of people that turned up were from the biggest brands in the world and the most senior people in those brands. And it was a glorious cross section of capability in UX, psychology, service design, pure tech, the whole gamut. And there's some really, really bright people, and there was some really, really deeply profound conversations going down and very ambitious things being talked about. So I think there's a groundswell which maybe we, the public, haven't yet experienced, but is coming through very fast. And the learning that we've had from this first generation is being recognized, and we're coming back out to it much kind of smarter. But having said that, the thing I was going to do is to give you the example of Finland, who decided they wanted to attract more inward investment. And so what they did, they built 3 bots, and the 3 bots were dealing with tax, they were dealing with residency, and they were dealing with something else. I can't quite find it right now. But the interesting thing is the bot was capable of recognizing when it didn't know the answer, but did recognize when its fellow bot had the answer. And
That's smart.
It automatically swap itself out with the widget, the context, the frame staying the same. But they were from 3 separate government sites. And I thought that was really smart, because that deals with one of the big problems here, which is siloism. Marketing is going to build one, sales is going to build one, service is going to build one, product lines will build one. And of course, that's a recipe, and that's for one modality. It's a recipe for a disaster. And that's a very elegant way of still staying focused, but nonetheless giving a cohesive approach.
Oh, I love that. I love, you are such a wealth of information, and just again, reminding us to be more human, to think bigger picture, but start in a smaller way. I love the use cases you shared. If people want to learn more about anything, they want to connect with you, where's the best place to do that?
Well, website, if people still go to those things, brainfoodextra.com. I've got pretty much my whole career on there, if you want to waste your life. But you can certainly get in contact with me there. I am very active on LinkedIn. That works for me. So just, look up Martin Hill Wilson there, and join in, and you'll find lots of stuff that I'm doing there. And just DM me, it's dead easy. Or I am Martin at brainfoodconsulting.com if you've got a good memory, and you can email me directly afterwards.
Perfect. Well, I thank you so much, Martin, for being here. I thank Andy, who was able to tell me about you and kind of connect us. I am so excited to hear more of what you do in the future, and thank you so much for being here.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. Kerry, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much all for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at ReadSpeaker AI, as well as our audio podcast, Creative and Tech, wherever you listen to podcasts.